The snow came early to Bitter Creek, Montana, that October of 1891. It came in sideways off the mountains, swallowing the peaks first, then the tree line, then the road, until the whole world narrowed down to a single muddy street and the few stubborn buildings that lined it. It was into this gray, indifferent cold that Nora Callahan stepped off the stage, clutching a leather satchel to her chest and blinking against the wind as though it had said something rude to her. She was 26 years old, with dark red hair that the wind immediately set about destroying, and the kind of quiet, watchful eyes that missed very little. She had come from Columbus, Ohio, on the strength of two letters, in fact, both signed by a Mr. Harold Fenwick, chairman of the Bitter Creek School Board. The first had offered her the teaching position. The second, which had caught up with her in Billings, had informed her, in the careful language of men who know they have done something wrong, that the schoolhouse had suffered a fire in September and would not be rebuilt until spring at the earliest. The position, he regretted to say, was suspended until further notice. She stood on the boardwalk outside the stage depot and reread that second letter, though she had it memorized by now. The ink had blurred slightly in the rain outside Billings. She folded it along its worn creases and placed it back in her satchel with the precision of a woman who keeps her chaos contained. She had $31 and some change. She had a trunk on the stage that cost her $2 to ship and now sat in the mud beside her like an accusation. She had no family west of the Ohio River. She had no plan. The wind pushed at her back as if trying to move her along, though it offered no particular direction. She pressed one hand against the crown of her hat and looked up and down the length of Bitter Creek's one real street, a general store, a livery, a small hotel with a sign that read $2 a night, which meant 15 nights of shelter before she was entirely ruined, a saloon, a church with a crooked steeple, and at the far end, a land office with a lamp burning orange in the window. She did not whisper. She was not a woman given to talking to herself. But something passed through her in that moment, a single, silent acknowledgement of the full weight of her situation. The teaching certificate in her satchel was useless until spring. The mill back home had taken her father's savings when it shuttered the year before. There was nothing to go back to, and, now, nothing waiting ahead. She picked up one end of her trunk and began dragging it toward the hotel. Across the street, in the open doorway of the livery, Ethan Dre watched her. He was 37, with the kind of face that weather makes not handsome in any easy sense, but precise. Sharp jaw, gray eyes that caught the light strangely, the permanent squint of a man who spends his life reading distance. He had come into town for a bag of salt and a new trace chain, neither of which the general store had in stock, and he was now leaning against the livery doorframe with the unhurried patience of a man who has learned that frustration changes nothing. He had seen the stage come in. He had watched the woman climb down, watched her read the letter, watched the exact moment her shoulders absorbed something difficult and held it. He was a man who paid attention to the way living things carried their burdens. It told him more about their character than anything they might say. He watched her drag the trunk. It was too heavy for her, and she knew it, and she was dragging it anyway, stopping every few feet to readjust her grip, her jaw set with a kind of furious practicality that he recognized. It was the look of a person who has decided that difficulty is not an excuse. He did not move immediately. He thought about his nephews, Jacob and Miles, 8 and 6 years old, climbing the walls of his ranch house with the energy of animals that needed something to do with their minds. He thought about the ledgers in his office, 4 years of accounts kept in the handwriting of a man, his late brother Clem, whose greatest gift had never been arithmetic. He thought about the ranch itself, the Dre sheep operation, 1,200 acres of Montana grassland that the Consolidated Land Syndicate had been quietly trying to buy out from under him for the better part of 2 years. He thought about the spare room off the kitchen that had held nothing but hay equipment since Clem's wife passed. He pushed himself off the doorframe and crossed the street. He reached her just as she had stopped for the 3rd time, set the trunk down with exaggerated care, and pressed the back of her wrist to her forehead. She heard his boots on the boards and turned to look at him with an expression that was neither frightened nor welcoming. It was the expression of a woman who has decided to evaluate everything that comes at her before responding to it. "That trunk's going to beat you," he said. It was not unfriendly. It was simply accurate. "It hasn't yet," she said. He looked at her for a moment. Then he picked up the other end of the trunk. She did not thank him immediately. She picked up her end, and they carried it to the hotel steps together, and she nodded once when they set it down. "Ethan Dre," he said. "Nora Callahan." She pulled off her glove and shook his hand with a directness that surprised him. "I was meant to be the new schoolteacher." The schoolhouse burned. "I know. I'm on the school board." He paused. "I voted against Mr. Fenwick's letter, the one that sent you out here, without telling you first." She looked at him. Something shifted slightly in her expression, not warmth exactly, but a door opening a crack. "What did you vote for?" "Telling you the truth before you bought a train ticket." She was quiet for a moment, considering that. "Mr. Dre," she said, "do you know anyone in this town who is looking for a bookkeeper or a housekeeper, or anyone who can do arithmetic and cook something other than beans?" He did not answer right away. He looked out at the street, at the snow coming down steadily now, softening the edges of everything. "I have a sheep ranch 10 miles north," he said. "I have 2 nephews who need teaching and 4 years of accounts that need untangling, and a kitchen that hasn't been properly managed since my brother's wife died in the spring." He said it all without inflection, the way a man reads out a list of damages after a storm, not looking for pity, just accounting for what is. The pay would be $25 a month and board. The room is plain, but it has a door that closes and a wood stove that works. He finally looked at her. "I won't pretend it's what you came here for, but it's honest work." She studied him the same way she had studied the letter, thoroughly, without hurry. "Are your nephews difficult?" she asked. "Enormously," he said. "Good," she said. "I taught in Columbus for 4 years. I'm better with difficult." She told the hotel to hold her trunk until morning and rode out to the Dre Ranch on a broad gray mare named December, following Ethan's buckskin through snow that was beginning to stick. She did not make conversation. She watched the land instead, the way the hills rolled toward the mountains, the dark line of pine forest to the north, the occasional white shape of a sheep visible through the weather. It was severe country, beautiful in the way that things are beautiful when they do not care whether you find them so. The ranch house was long and low, built into the hillside to cut the wind, solid stone foundation, timber walls, a covered porch that wrapped around 2 sides. It needed paint. The fence line along the near pasture had a section down. But the barn was in good repair, and the yard was orderly in the way that working places are orderly, not tidy, but purposeful. Everything where it was, because that was where it needed to be. 2 boys appeared in the doorway before she had dismounted. Jacob, the elder, crossed his arms and assessed her from the porch with an expression uncannily like his uncle's. Miles, behind him, peered around his brother with wide eyes, and one sock pulled up higher than the other. "She looks like a teacher," Jacob announced, with the tone of a man delivering a verdict. "She is one," Ethan said, swinging down from his horse. "Get back inside. It's cold." Nora dismounted and looked at Jacob. "What's 7 times 8? He blinked. 56. "What's the capital of Ohio?" A pause. "Columbus? Good." She climbed the porch steps. "We'll work on your geography first. Your arithmetic is ahead of your history." Jacob stared after her as she walked inside. Miles tugged his brother's sleeve. "I like her," he whispered. Inside, the house was warm and smelled of wood smoke and wool and the lingering ghost of a meal. The main room had a large stone hearth, a scarred trestle table, a set of mismatched chairs, and walls covered in the kind of practical clutter that accumulates in a place run by people who are too busy to organize bridles, hanging on pegs, stacked almanacs, a child's boot sitting alone on the mantelpiece for reasons that were entirely unclear. Nora removed her coat and hat and looked at the room with the calm, cataloging gaze that would come to unnerve people once they understood what it meant. "The kitchen," she said to Ethan. It was not quite a question. He showed her. It was what she'd expected, not dirty, but haphazard. Tins stacked without system, staples running low on things that should be plentiful, and overstocked on things that weren't needed. A pot of something that had boiled dry sat forgotten on the back of the stove. The pantry door hung slightly off its hinges. "The hinges need fixing," she said. "I know. The potatoes are going soft on the left side. They need to be sorted or you'll lose the lot." "I know that too," he said, with a trace of something that might have been embarrassment. "I'm not criticizing," she said, turning to look at him directly. "I'm telling you what I'm going to do first." She rolled up her sleeves. "I'll have something on the table in an hour." "Is there anyone else in the house besides you and the boys?" "I've got 2 ranch hands, Tom and old Pete. They eat in the bunkhouse mostly, but they'll come in Sundays." She nodded once, already moving toward the pantry. "Go see to the horses, Mr. Dre. I'll manage from here." He went. She had venison stew on the table in 45 minutes, with cornbread and a pot of strong coffee. The boys ate with the desperate speed of children who have been surviving on the culinary goodwill of someone who is trying but not quite succeeding. Ethan ate with the careful restraint of a man who does not want to suggest that anything has been lacking. But he cleaned the bowl. "You were right about the geography," Jacob said, apparently to no one, toward the end of the meal. "I don't know what the capital of Virginia is." "Richmond," Nora said, without looking up from her coffee. "Richmond," he repeated, storing it. "There'll be lessons in the mornings after breakfast. 2 hours. Your uncle tells me you both have an arithmetic primer. Bring it tomorrow." Miles looked up at his uncle. Ethan gave him a barely perceptible nod. Miles looked back at Nora and decided, silently, to do whatever she said. By the end of her first week, the pantry was organized by category and season. The potato problem had been solved. The Sunday dinner drew both ranch hands to the main table, and old Pete, a man of approximately 60 years, who had offered no more than 4 words in a row to anyone in recent memory, described her biscuits as considerable, which Tom told her afterward was the highest form of praise Pete possessed. By the end of the second week, she had found the ledgers. They were in a wooden crate under Ethan's desk, layered under old cattle receipts and a broken compass, and what appeared to be a child's drawing of a horse that Miles had someday decided was important enough to keep. The ledgers were 4 of them, thick and cloth-bound, and they were the financial record of the Dre sheep operation from 1887 to the present. She had asked Ethan if she might look at them in the evenings, after the boys were in bed. He'd said yes without much ceremony, apparently trusting her or simply too tired to object. She began on a Monday night and did not stop until close to midnight. She worked by lamplight at the big table, her dark red hair loose now, a pen behind her ear and another in her hand, ruling columns on fresh paper in a hand so clear and even it looked like typeset. The state of the books was not criminal. It was simply the work of an honest man who was better with land than numbers. Clem Dre had kept records the way some men kept a diary regularly, earnestly, and with a set of personal abbreviations that made perfect sense to the author and no one else. Cross-referencing took her the better part of 2 evenings, but when it came clear all at once, the way a fog burns off to reveal a landscape that was there all along. The ranch was not failing. That was the first thing she established, and she understood it mattered. But it was hemorrhaging money in 3 specific places, slowly enough that no one had noticed the pattern. The wool buyer in Missoula was discounting the clip 2 cents per pound below market rate and had been doing so for 3 years, citing transport costs that Nora found in an old bill of lading were fabricated. The winter feed contract was priced for a herd twice the current size, a legacy of an expansion that had never happened, and a grazing lease on the north pasture was being paid quarterly to a land management company that, when she traced the paperwork back, appeared to share a mailing address with the Consolidated Land Syndicate, the very company that had been making offers to buy the Dre Ranch for the past 2 years. She sat with that last piece of paper for a long time. She heard Ethan come in from his last check of the barn. He always did it late, a habitual final accounting of the animals before he would let himself rest. She heard him hang his coat, heard the particular sound of his boots on the floorboards measured, unhurried. He appeared in the doorway of the sitting room and stopped when he saw her. She had spread papers across the full length of the table. She was sitting very still in the lamplight, a document in both hands, looking at it the way she looked at things she had made up her mind about. "You should be asleep," he said. It wasn't a reprimand. It was the sort of thing a person says when they don't know how to ask what's wrong. She looked up. "I need to show you something," she said. "Sit down, Mr. Dre." Something in her voice made him sit. She took him through it in order. The wool discount, he frowned but said nothing, listening. The feed contract, he exhaled slowly through his nose. Then she placed the grazing lease in front of him and pointed to the address at the bottom of the page and told him what she'd found. He read it twice. His face did not change much, but his jaw tightened in a way that told her a great deal. "You're saying they've been leasing me my own grazing rights," he said slowly, "through a company that is also trying to buy me out." "I'm saying that's what the paperwork shows," she said. "I cannot tell you yet what it means legally, but it means someone in this arrangement knows more about your operation than they should. The lease payments are going somewhere, and wherever that is, it connects back to the syndicate." Ethan set the paper down very carefully, the way a man sets something down when he is choosing not to throw it. "There's one more thing," she said. She pulled out the fresh ledger sheet she had prepared, clean columns, figures in black ink. "This is what the ranch actually earned last year, adjusted for the overcharges. And this," she placed a second sheet beside it, "is what it should have earned." The difference was not enormous, but it was not nothing. It was the difference between a struggling operation and a solvent one. He looked at the numbers for a long time. He was not a fast reader of columns, and she waited without impatience, watching him work through it. "You did all this tonight," he said. It was not quite a question. "Tonight and the 2 evenings before," she said. "I wanted to be certain before I said anything." He looked up from the papers at her. The lamplight caught the angles of his face, and he had the expression of a man recalibrating something fundamental, not about her, but about himself, about what he'd been missing. There was no wounded pride in it. That surprised her. "Write a letter to the wool buyer," he said. "Lay out the discrepancy. Don't threaten, just state the facts the way you just stated them to me and see what he does." She nodded. "And the syndicate?" He was quiet for a moment. "I'm going to need to know if this lease is legal before I do anything about that. I'll ride to Billings next week. There's a lawyer there. In the meantime," she said, "I'd stop paying it." Something shifted in his expression. "You think that's safe?" "I think paying someone who is potentially running a fraud against you is not safe," she said evenly. "But I also think you know your own risk better than I do." He almost smiled. It was brief, and she might have missed it if she hadn't been watching. "You're a long way from Columbus, Miss Callahan." "Ohio," she said, "did not have mountains." He stood, gathering his coat from the chair where he'd draped it. He paused at the door, his hand on the frame, his back to her. "I don't know that I'd have found any of this," he said. "Not in a year. You'd have found the wool discount eventually," she said. "You have a careful eye, just not for numbers." "No," she said, with the first trace of warmth she'd allowed. "Not for numbers." He left. She turned back to the lamp and sat for a while in the quiet of the house, listening to the snow against the windows and the distant sound of one of the boys turning over in bed. The ranch was foreign to her still, and vast, and utterly unlike anything she had come west expecting. But something had settled in her chest that she recognized, distantly, as the feeling of being in the right place. She ignored it with the discipline of a practical woman and went to bed. The months turned. November deepened. Snow packed against the north fence, and Ethan and Tom spent 3 days breaking a trail to the upper pasture. The boys had their lessons every morning at the kitchen table, and Nora discovered that Jacob's gift was for argument, careful, structured, legal argument, and that Miles had the spatial instincts of an engineer, building things from any available materials with an absorption that was total and complete. She taught to what she found, not to what she expected. On Sundays, when the morning lesson was done and the dinner dishes cleared, the house sometimes settled into a quiet that was not empty but filled with the sound of a fire, a child's pencil on paper, the occasional word between adults. Nora had begun keeping a chair by the east window with a good view of the valley, and she brought a book there on Sunday afternoons. Ethan did not keep a particular chair, but he had begun to tend toward the armchair nearest the fire on those afternoons, and no one remarked on this pattern, and so it continued. Old Pete remarked on it, once, to Tom, out of anyone's hearing. Tom told him to mind his mouth. Then they both went back to looking toward the house with the quiet satisfaction of people watching something they'd been hoping would happen. In February, a letter arrived from the Consolidated Land Syndicate. It was addressed to Ethan, but it was Nora who collected the mail on her weekly supply run to town. She recognized the letterhead from the grazing lease and handed it to Ethan unopened at the dinner table with the directness that had become characteristic between them. He read it and passed it to her without comment. It was an offer, the most serious one they'd made yet, $3,000 for the north pasture alone, a parcel of land that the letter described as marginal grazing terrain with limited long-term productivity. The offer was timed, she noticed immediately, to expire in 30 days. That was not a coincidence. 30 days was February, the hardest month. The month when ranchers were most exhausted and most likely to look at a number and see relief rather than a trap. She turned the letter over. On the back, in small print, were the terms of what they called a partnership arrangement. For the remaining acreage, a convoluted structure that would give the syndicate right of first refusal on any future sale, effectively locking Ethan to them permanently. She set the letter down. "What do you know about what's north of your property line?" she asked. He frowned. "Scrub, mostly, some old creek beds. The survey ran through there about 8 years ago. Who commissioned the survey?" He thought. "I did, for the original land filing." He paused. "Why?" "Because when a company calls land marginal," she said carefully, "and then offers to buy it, the question is whether they're telling you the truth about why they want it, or whether they want it for a reason they're not telling you." She had already, quietly, in the weeks since she'd found the grazing lease irregularity, been reading everything she could find in the land office on her supply runs. She'd read old territorial surveys, water rights filings, railroad expansion reports. She was thorough in a way that came from a genuine interest in the shape of things, in how the land and the law and the money all fitted together. "There's a rail spur being planned," she said. "I read about it in a Billings paper from December. They're looking at routes through this valley. The north pasture sits directly on the most logical grade." She met his eyes. "That land is not marginal, Mr. Dre. If the rail comes through, it's worth 10 times what they're offering." Ethan went very still. "You're certain?" he said. It was not really a question. "I'm certain enough that I'd tell you to wait," she said. "Hold the land, don't sell. Write back and decline politely and give no reason." She paused. "And I think you should take what I found about the grazing lease to your lawyer." He was silent for a long moment. The fire popped. Miles was drawing at the other end of the table, industriously oblivious. Jacob, who had been pretending to read, was not pretending at all and had heard every word, though he was wise enough not to show it. "Nora," Ethan said, and it was the first time he had used her given name without the courtesy of her title, and they both noticed. "If you're wrong about the railroad, then you've declined a fair offer and can accept a future one," she said steadily. "But if I'm right and you sell, you can't undo it." He looked at the letter. He looked at her. He picked up the letter and folded it in half. "I'll write back tomorrow," he said. "And I'll ride to Billings next week." She nodded and went back to her book. Miles held up his drawing, a picture of a sheep wearing what appeared to be a very small hat. She told him it was excellent and meant it. Spring came slowly to that valley, the snow retreating up the hillsides by degrees, revealing the dark earth underneath. By March, the first green was showing along the creek. By April, the upper pasture was accessible again, and the ewes were lambing. And there were 3 weeks where Ethan barely slept, and Nora kept coffee perpetually on the stove, and the two of them crossed paths in the kitchen at all hours, with the comfortable ease of people who have long since stopped performing. Composure for each other. The rail announcement came in a territorial newspaper in late April. The northern spur route was confirmed. The planned depot location was within 2 miles of the Dre property line. The same week, a letter arrived from Ethan's lawyer in Billings. The grazing lease had been fraudulent. The land management company had no legal standing. The syndicate's representative had signed papers he had no authority to sign, and the money Ethan had paid over 18 months was recoverable. Ethan read both letters at the kitchen table, while Nora set bread to rise. He did not say much. He was quiet for a long time, looking at the table. Then he said, "You knew." "I suspected," she said. "About the railroad. About the lease, I was more certain. If I'd sold when they first came to me," he said, "2 years ago, before you." He stopped. She turned from the counter to look at him. He was a man unaccustomed to reckoning with near misses. He sat with the newspaper and the lawyer's letter side by side on the table, and the full shape of what hadn't happened seemed to settle on him all at once. He looked older for a moment. Then, something in his face resolved. He pushed back his chair and stood. He walked to the counter and stood beside her, not quite facing her, looking out the kitchen window at the valley below the creek, catching April light, the white dots of sheep on the near hill, the boys somewhere out by the barn doing something that probably needed supervision. "I've been trying to figure out how to say something to you since February," he said. "I'm not built for it." She did not make it easier for him. She had learned, by now, that he did not want things made easier. He wanted them to be honest. "I want to ask you not to leave when the school opens in the fall," he said. He was looking at the window, not at her. "Not because of the books, or the boys' lessons, or the kitchen. Those things matter, but that's not why." He turned then, finally, and looked at her directly with those gray eyes that read distance so well. "I'd like you to stay, because this house is a different place with you in it. Because I'm a different person, I think. A better one at paying attention." He stopped and made a frustrated sound. "I had a speech." "It's gone." For the first time in Bitter Creek, Nora Callahan laughed a real one, unguarded, that reached all the way up to her eyes. "You don't need a speech, Mr. Dre." "Ethan," he said a little sharply. "Ethan," she said, and the warmth in how she said it told him everything. She reached out and set her hand on his forearm, steady and certain. "You'd better fix that section of fence on the east pasture before you start making plans. It's been down since October." He looked at her. "Is that a yes?" "That," she said, "is a yes and a fence." They were married in June, when the valley was green and enormous, and the mountains had shed their snow down to the high timber. The circuit preacher came on a Thursday. Old Pete wore a collar that appeared to cause him genuine physical suffering. Miles wore both socks pulled up for the first time in recorded memory. Jacob, who had by now developed a considered opinion on everything, declared the ceremony efficient, which was the highest compliment he knew. Nora wore a pale green dress she had ordered from a catalog in Billings, and in her hair she wore a sprig of serviceberry that Ethan had brought in from the hillside that morning without a word, setting it on the kitchen table where she would find it when she came down. She found it. She didn't say anything about it either. She put it in her hair. 3 years later, the Dre Ranch had a new name on the deed, Dre and Callahan, by Nora's specific insistence and Ethan's complete agreement. The rail spur had come through, and the north pasture now included a small depot that leased the land from them at a figure that covered the year's feed costs twice over. The fraud claim against the syndicate had settled, and the recovered funds had gone into fencing and a new barn and a proper schoolroom addition on the east side of the house because the school in town had finally been rebuilt, but Jacob and Miles had refused to go back to it, and Nora had quietly agreed with their reasoning. She stood at the east window on a Saturday morning in October, the same month she had arrived, watching the boys argue cheerfully over something in the yard below. Jacob was gesturing with the authority of a future attorney. Miles was ignoring him and stacking rocks with the focus of a future engineer. Ethan came to stand beside her, handing her a mug of coffee without being asked. She took a sip. "Still too strong," she said. "You've been saying that for 3 years." It has been too strong for 3 years. He looked down at the yard, at the boys, at the valley beyond, green gold in the autumn light, the mountains purple and clear, at the far edge of the world. He put his arm around her and she leaned her shoulder into him with the ease of a woman who has found the exact right place to stand. It had not been a rescue. It had never looked like one. It had been two people, each carrying their own weight, who happened to walk in the same direction long enough to notice that the weight was lighter when they weren't walking alone. It had been a woman who read numbers the way other people read faces, and a man who read land the way other people read books, and the particular, unglamorous miracle of two kinds of intelligence finding the shape of what the other couldn't see. It had been an extra cup of coffee in the small hours of a Montana morning, and a fence that still needed fixing, and a boy wearing both socks, and a sprig of serviceberry on a kitchen table. It had been enough. It had been, in fact, everything. Sometimes, the life you were meant to have arrives looking nothing like the one you planned. Nora came west to teach children in a schoolhouse that no longer stood and found. Instead, that her truest gifts were exactly what a good man and two lonely boys needed most. When a door closes hard enough to knock the breath out of you, it is worth pausing before you turn back. The right place rarely announces itself. It just quietly needs you. A small note for you: this story was created and fictionalized by AI, crafted to bring you a moment of warmth and entertainment, and to leave behind a little something worth carrying into your day.